Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to run through how we go about dealing with a fashion retouch. This is done slightly differently. You could do some of it using basically the same things that we did. You probably still have to use some adjustment layers, some healing, but you can do the majority of it, especially the most difficult parts of the retouch, using what we call a split frequency retouching method, because we've got this area here. Let me just zoom up on her a little bit so you can see a little bit more easily. This line down here, which is very dark, and then another one down here. So these sinewy areas of the neck and the face. This one where I think they probably put on the what do you call it, the blusher a little bit too deep. It's obviously done with a makeup artist, and sometimes this stuff occurs if the makeup artist isn't that great. We've got some weird shadows under the nose that probably should have been bounced out. So, this kind of retouching is when there's mistakes in the lighting. She already has very clean skin, so I don't feel that we need to do a spot healing or cloning on this at the moment. What I am going to use it for later is to remove these circles under the eyes, only because it's quicker to do that than to do it with the split frequency retouching. So carrying on, what we want to do first is we need to duplicate this layer twice. So the quickest way to duplicate the layer is Command J. So Command J twice. We're going to name this layer, I'll use the longer name, I usually call it LF, but it's low frequency. And then the top one is going to be our high frequency layer. Now you can find these on lynda.com. They also have ones for high pass retouching, which is very, very similar to the frequency retouching. You can also just do a Google search, and I will link that on the course supplement, so it'll give you a little bit more of an explanation about how to do this. So the first thing we want to do is, with our low frequency layer, we need to add in a Gaussian Blur. So that's under our filter menu, and you choose Blur, Gaussian Blur, and because I tend to practice these because I've got to get them on one shot and not mess around with them when I do them, this was what I used last night when I was prepping for this, so that's in about the right vicinity. What you're looking for here is a point at which the colours blend together. We're not worried about how sharp any of the image is, just where the blending is. So if I jumped up to here, there's no blending. I can't see the basic colours in there. So there isn't a wrong or right amount. You learn this from experience. Some people do it more and some people do it less than others. But, as long as you're in this kind of vicinity where the colours blend but you can still see the features, you should be fine with split frequency retouch. So this is our low frequency layer. Now on our high frequency layer, we need to go up to the image menu. So this is the image menu. It's got our adjustments in it. It goes Photoshop, File, Edit, and then Image. And under the image, we're going to use a thing called Apply Image, which I love using for channel mixing. That's what it's mostly used for. But for this, we're not going to channel mix, we're going to layer mix. So here is what the channel mix is, just to give you an idea of what channel mixing does. And let me set this back to something other than what it's on right now. So mixing channels in can mix in texture into your image. You can make it very high contrast, and the channel that holds the most skin texture is the blue channel. So just forget all of that. Assume that you've opened this up and it's set to RGB. This is what it would look like if you hadn't been using it. So the first thing you need to change is a layer. The layer must be changed from merged to low frequency. So that's the blurry layer in the background. And then the next thing that we need to do is go, hold on one second, is to then change our blending to subtract. Now if you're doing this at home, this is what it'll look like when it is turned on to subtract. It looks very similar to if you've ever used high pass for sharpening. It has a look very close to that. And this gives you a couple of other options here. We are given a scale of 2 and an offset of 128. If you have a 16-bit image, and most cameras shoot 16-bit, this one, because it's a JPEG and it's been converted down for use in the course as an 8-bit image. So these are all the 8-bit image settings. If I was to do this on a 16-bit, I would actually use add, and I would have to hit the invert button. And I think the scale is 128. I might have to look up the settings on the document, but I do have them on the document that I'll give you. And this is, in fact, this is actually what it should look like. So maybe the scale is 2 and the offset is 0 on this one. And it'll give you a very similar look to the image, but it'll have more detail in it because it's 16-bit. Anyway, this is 8-bit. So if you're wondering how you know, just up here it says RGB. That means that the image is in RGB color mode. And then we have 8 after it, which means 8-bit. If this was a 16-bit image, it would say RGB/16. So you can always tell when you're in here, and you don't want invert on for this one. So it's layers, low frequency, channel you leave set to RGB, blending is subtract, scale is 2, and offset is 128. And I have this in note form, which I'll put alongside this video, so that you can read these measurements, especially because there is such a difference between 8-bit and 16-bit. They're almost inverse of each other. So now that you've got that, you can just go ahead and hit OK. Now it's obviously not much good to us like this, so now we need to change this to linear light, which is down here. And this is going to make the image look pretty much identical to what it was. It looks like you can't see the low frequency layer. If I option click on the eye icon, which allows us to see certain layers, this allows me to get back to my background layer. I haven't done anything to my background layer, so you can see right now there's no shift between them. Now the things that you use when you're using split frequency, the one that you're most likely to use is the cloning stamp. I've heard other people say no, you must use the healing brush, and so there's different schools of thoughts on this, but I always get better techniques with the cloning stamp on both the high frequency and the low frequency. Some people use the healing brush, I think it's on the low frequency, the cloning stamp on the high frequency, but you know, you figure out what works for you. So let's start with one of the easier retouches. I say that this is easier because it's very close, it's got a lot of skin, pale skin around it, so it's as simple as just painting over it. Whenever you use a cloning stamp, you're going to need to change some settings up here. I've changed the opacity to about 62% and the flow to 48%. This is just to mean that it blends as it does it, and it also, the flow kind of tapers out. So just to show you what this would look like, I'm going to choose a sample of skin that's lighter. I hold down the Option key and click to choose that bit of skin, and I'm then going to just brush across it, and I'm on the wrong layer. I need to be on the low frequency one, so do the same thing again. And it really doesn't look like it's done a lot, but if you look at that, it's lightened it considerably. So what we use the low frequency layer for is to essentially clone out any dark areas of the image. So I'm going to come back to that darker bit of line, but while I've still got this on its same settings, I'm going to work a little bit on the shadow area. So you'll have to tweak the settings a little bit as you do this. So as I go down here, you can see it's darkening it because I'm pulling from a darker shadow and darkening it on there. If I want to go the other way, I need to find a light bit of skin, and that's going to lighten it too much. So it's at this point where we start needing to lower our opacity and also possibly the flow. So let's see what we get from there. So that's lightening it quite a bit. I'm also going to bring the flow down. So one of the things that's tricky about split frequency is you're not just given a set of numbers. There's a lot of tweaking involved to get good matches. The more you use it, the more used to this kind of tweaking that you'll get. So now I can paint over here, and you can see it's lightened it quite a bit. Again, I'd probably argue that it's a little bit too light. So I'm going to try doing this a different way. I'm going to lighten the area above it using this. So I'm doing it from that lower shadow. And likewise, I'm going to lighten the area down here. The best way to use the high frequency, low frequency is to build it up. Don't try to get it all in one pass because it can start looking pretty weird if you do that. So we generally like to just do a little bit at a time and sample from different areas till you get it about the right lightness. Now, if you're having a hard time on the video seeing what I'm getting, remember I can always do that. So what I've done really is just lighten that area. As with the other one that I did, the other video tutorial, because these take a long time to record and to do them properly, I will in fact do this fairly roughly, so you don't have to sit in front of it for an hour watching me tweak these settings. I'm also going to take a little bit more out of this line down here. And because it's not coming up very much, I'm going to change the opacity back up. And it's still not coming up quite enough. I have a very low flow on here, so I'll try the flow a little bit higher. I don't want to take it out altogether, but I definitely want it a bit lighter. And you see I'm doing multiple passes over here. I'm a little bit worried that with the brush size I am making a little bit too light on the edges. Again, that can be fixed, because this is all about bringing in darker colours where need be. So I'm going to bring up the opacity a little bit more and with a smaller brush. And also, if you watch the other video first, you will know that because of the screen resolution of the capture, I'm working with this at a very low amount, which makes it much harder to do than if you're working on a high-res image. I know a lot of my students complain about this with some of the resolutions in the class that we use. So all I'm trying to do is get it down into a span of these lighter ones so it looks less sinewy. So now I'm going to tackle the tougher one, which is this one. And again, I need to come in pretty close. It shouldn't be too hard to do this. I'm going to use the default ones, but I think I'm going to have to take them down a little bit. When I say the default ones, I mean the ones that I was using last time. And then a little bit up here. It's getting just a little bit too light in there now. I really need to pull up from this darker area down here. So let's see what we've got. It still needs to be lightened up around here, and with a little bit of the red in it. Just going to go a little bit darker in the flow. Try to think if I want to go darker or lighter. But I think darker, just to kind of patch in that area. So this is where she is at now. So she's still got the texture and the colour on her. So let's zoom up here, and we're going to remove some of this around her forehead. So that's coming up too strong again. So remember, these tool options, they need to be changed when you're working on this. If it's starting to look too much like a scar, then it needs to come down even further. And I'm going for a slightly broader brush. And again, multiple passes. Multiple passes is usually the way to go. A lot of Photoshop stuff requires that. I'm also going to see to what extent I can change this shadow. I really just want to lighten it. If I take it out completely, it really starts to make her nose look misshapen. So that doesn't look too bad, but only if it comes out a little bit closer in here. So also don't be scared to get in too close to these areas. And I'm sampling from different areas of the image to get this. I think the flow needs to come up a little bit now. So now when I zoom out, that shadow is not quite as noticeable. Now these ones around here, they look like they should be easy to remove with the split frequency. So if I come around here, you know, it's a little bit better. I've got a pretty low flow on here, but honestly I would take those out using cloning. Now with this image, her skin is so clear that there isn't a lot to take out in terms of blemishes. So if you find anything on there, you could try to take it out. The high frequency is what we usually use to do this. However, don't be afraid to mix and match. If you find high frequency difficult to get the results that you need, just do what we did with the natural retouch. So that involves putting on a brand new blank image. So there's my, blank layer. So there's my blank layer, nothing on it. And now I'm going to go to the healing stamp, and I've still got it on the healing brush. And I'm going to use current and below. I could also just put it, I could move this in the layer palette down to here, but because I've already started doing the high frequency, low frequency, I don't want to do the skin retouching below that because it'll mess up some of the things that I have on here. If you're kind of curious about what this looks like, let's just zoom out a little bit. So this is what the low frequency layer looks like. So you can see these areas that I've patched. I haven't done an awful lot with the high frequency because there wasn't much to take out on that one. But you'll be able to see in a moment too what we have on the skin retouching. So this is where I'm going to correct her eyes. So just using the healing brush, I don't need to have it set down or anything, and just painting around it. If it's looking too dark in places, again, do it in multiple passes. One of the things that I notice students trying to do is always a little bit rough and ready. So they do it in one single pass, and then they wonder why it suddenly looks muddy or weird in the way that they've done it. So one of the disadvantages of the healing brush is it does make the skin texture a little bit muddy. So, you know, you can pick and choose with the different skills that you know. If you want to stop it being muddy, you can pull texture from other areas of the image. I know there's some around here, and it will copy that texture in. You'd have to have a large enough. I wonder if I could even bring it in from there. That looks a bit rougher than it did on the bottom of her eye. But just to avoid, you know, losing the skin texture, you'll see how it brings it in. But as I said, it was too rough for the bottom areas of the sky. So try to match texture with texture, because this will bring it in and pretty much heal out areas under the eye as you need them. I'm actually wondering if I took a little bit too much out of the other eye, but if I just bring it down under here, let's see what we get. Yeah, that looks very wrong. I'm just going to step back a moment to there. Just because I think I took it a little bit too low in here. It really needs to kind of come out around this bottom bit. But any lower than that, and it's not going to match the other eye. Okay, so now that we have that done, let's take a look at the eyes. So we did this last time by using the adjustment tool. Now, you probably all know that under the brush tool, I think it is, it's not one that I use, but this color replacement tool. The reason that I wouldn't use that one is simply because it is extremely difficult to reverse. I'd have to do it on a background duplicated layer, and I prefer to do as few duplications as possible. Sometimes students do this submission for me, and I honestly get files with 100 layers in. So it's not a great way to work with retouching. You want to minimize it, but make sure that everything is editable. In case you didn't watch the other video, this is what the skin retouching looks like when it's on its own layer. So it's not done on the background layer, it's done on here. That's why we have the current and below set on there. So in the other one, I showed you how to use hue and saturation to do the eyes. And this one, we're going to do it the way we did the hair in the other one. We're just going to do it really simply by painting in a flat colour. So let me go back to my brush tool, and I'm going to choose, let's see, she's got kind of green eyes, so I'm going to go for a greenish colour. So of course when I paint this on, it's going to look wrong. And I have my paintbrush on soft light. That's one of the things that, because I'm often running tutorials on my own computer, I'm forever changing the tools in here. but you don't want it on soft light. You could use it on that, I suppose, but I'm going to use a layer blend so that I can change things to multiply or soft light. So this would be a quick and easy way to change the irises. So let's just zoom out one more time. So yes, of course they look weird. The main mixing that I use is multiply, overlay, and soft light. And soft light has the least difficult or least intense effect, and sometimes hard light, but we're going to use soft light. And then we're going to do the same as what we did last time. We're going to use hue and saturation. So I can change these. So if I wanted our eyes to be blue, it's as simple as that. So if I want to do a complete change of colour, I tend to do it with a paintbrush, paint it on, and then cycle it through the different hue colours. If I want to go with a more intense green, I can bring it down here. I can also darken it or lighten it. I can saturate it or desaturate it. In this case, to be honest, I desaturate because the green is such an intense colour. If you click preview on and off, you can see the difference that it's making to that colour that's on there. I could also go to brown coloured eyes, which may be something I want because looking at her makeup, that's the kind of makeup that would go with brown. I can't do hazel very easily. I have hazel eyes myself. And the reason that hazel is more difficult is because it's two colours, so it's easier to change somebody with hazel eyes rather than to manipulate the colours in hazel eyes. So I'm going to go back up here to, I'm just going to go with a plain blue and then hit OK to it. So now you can see their eyes are no longer green, and it's not an intense change. We often don't want an intense change for the eyes. So she had kind of kind of grey eyes before, but this is now just making them a little bit bluer. Now, you'll remember last time, if you watched the other video, I had some issues with going back in and doing hue and saturation twice. It didn't seem to like me redoing it over the original, but you can always use colorize. The difference between doing just a hue is it will keep any hues that are within the image. Colorize will allow me to adjust hues. So if I wanted to, so it'll lay down a very flat blue colour. If I take the preview off, and I can increase the saturation. I can also make them lighter if her eyes are a little bit too dark. So I end up with something like that, which is a little bit more intense and a little bit more contrasty with the makeup. So really the last thing that I want to do with this one is the hair. The hair's kind of looks like it has a little bit of a bald patch because it's pulled so tight. So let's go in, and the easiest way to fix this is to sample. In fact, I'm going to sample around there. This is just using the lasso tool, lasso, we call it lasso where I come from, and just taking a selection on there. With selection we can use this thing called refine edge because I just want a bit of a feather on it. Because the feather will help me blend it a little bit easier. So we're going to get up into that kind of vicinity for the feather. And I need it to come in from the background. So I have to be on the background layer. If I tried to do it from eye color, nothing would happen. So to duplicate a selection like this, it's Command J on the keyboard. And I'm going to move it back up to the topmost layer, but this is what it looks like. It's just a bit of hair. So to cover this, I obviously could just shift it and then blend it, but what I want to do, because it won't be noticeable, is shift it, and then I'm going to use my transform tool. So free transform should do it, which is Command T if you're using keyboard commands, which you should learn before you graduate from SCAD. That's something that I use all the time. And I'm just going to pull it so that it covers up that area of hair. Let's move it down a little bit. So this is what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like now. I'm also going to apply a mask to this. That might seem a pointless thing to do, but I'm just a little bit worried about the blending in here. So with the mask, I can just get a softer blend if I'm painting with the right colour. I was painting white on white. So you get something that will work pretty well. Let's bring that back in a little bit. And honestly, a lot of these changes no one's going to notice. You will notice them, but most people wouldn't. So I'm just going to do the same thing on this side. So I'm going to take a slightly wider bit. And then do refine edge. Put a feather on it. And again, it needs to come from the background. So Command J from the background layer. So let's just name these. This is going to be called hair left. And this one's going to be called hair right. So same thing again, I can shift it, I can rotate it, and I'm using Command T, so an automatic movement on it. And best of all, I can resize it. So I need to make it match in. The part is there, so kind of up here, and it has to match with the other hair that's kind of curling down there. I need to come out a little bit to see how that's matching. Okay, I think that's good enough. I know that seems weird, but again, masks are your best friends in Photoshop. If you mask nothing else, it should be layer masks, because you will use them all the time for blending. And if you need a simpler blend in there, then you can use one. And by that I mean, so I'll just move that over there. And see if I need to take some off here. Keep switching colours, which gets a bit weird. So this is what we're going to end up with. Okay, so this is her with her hair. So you can see it's taken out that weird bald spot, for want of a better word. The shadows are all lessened, and we've taken out the areas under her eyes. So the last thing that I would do with these, let me just turn off my video timeline because it's taking up so much space on here. I also do cinemagraphs on here for my own ground class, so that's why I have the video timeline up sometimes. So this is the one most important keyboard command you'll ever use. Make sure that you're on the top layer, and you're going to go Command, Option, Shift, E. And this is what it does. It adds the, it basically adds a composite of everything that you've done as a single composite image. So the last thing that we're going to do with this is we're going to add what we call a high pass filter. So it's under the filter, it's under other, and it's called high pass. And it looks like this. The amount of radius you'll use will be dependent on the image. That's quite a lot right now. I'll probably lower it a little bit. But what I'm looking for is basically an outline that is fairly grey. If I push it up much higher, you'll see that greyness is lost. So I'm in the region of around 8 to 10. Then you simply click OK and change that high pass layer to overlay. And this is what it does. It makes it really sharp. So just like the other ones that we've been doing, only some areas of this image should be kept sharp. We don't want to sharpen the pores in her skin. So we're going to add a layer mask. This is the layer mask icon right down here at the bottom of your layers palette. And when we hold down the Option key, it adds a hide all layer mask. So now everything is hidden on this layer. So now I'm going to use white, and I'm going to paint back in the eyes and the makeup around the eyes. And likewise on here. I also want the lips to be really sharp, so I'm painting back detail into the lips. I usually do around the nostrils and the nose. Not everybody necessarily does that, but I think that any features on the face should have definition. I would do earrings or any other jewellery they're wearing, and of course hair. We usually want our hair to look fairly sharp. There might be times when you want it to be soft, but I don't think this is one of them. So there we now have our finished image, and you guys can see exactly what it should look like. We don't remove these entirely. You could also dodge and burn them out. I think I did that with this one. So this one uses a dodge and burn layer. I just don't use dodge and burn as much as split frequency because it increases the saturation, which I would then have to put another pass on it to take out some of that saturation. But using a dodge and burn layer, which is like we used in the other one, I think, but it's in my video tutorials anyway, is a quick way to make this image work fairly well. So this was the original one I did without using hue saturation. I used a curves layer just to brighten up the skin, and then the dodge burn layer, and then we have this one which is darker, and that's probably because I've got all these turned off. So let me do that again. This one where the shadows are very burned or dodged out, and this one where they're a lot darker, but it looks a little bit more believable. So two different ways of doing it, both of them acceptable depending on the look that you want.